Have you ever experienced a time when your baby was not getting enough milk and you could not figure out why your milk supply was low? There was no physiological reason you could attribute your low milk supply to. Do you know someone who has experienced this? Do you know somebody who did all the right things to prepare for a birth and a postpartum experience that led to smooth baby feeding and it just did not work out that way? My guest today shares her personal experience of low milk supply and a baby that was hospitalized as a result when she was just 2 weeks old. My guest is also a licensed mental health professional specializing in people in the perinatal period. So she takes the opportunity to share resources that she offers so that those of us who work with people in the perinatal period can feel confident that we know how to respond to people when they're telling us, no, I'm not doing okay. I'm really struggling. Because as she says, it's not the question that is hard to ask when we are trying to figure out where people are doing with their mental health, but it's what do we do with the answer? We have to be prepared for any answer if we're going to ask the question, as Michelle says. So enjoy this beautiful episode from somebody who has been through it and has gotten to the other side and is really helping both parents and professionals to take better care of their mental health in the perinatal period. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
So before we get into your baby feeding stories, I would just love to hear a little bit about you and your family.
So I'm a mom to a 5.5-year-old. I am also a psychotherapist. I've spent the last about 10-ish plus years at this point, mostly working with families and pregnant and postpartum people. And that's really been my joy and population that I really find exciting. That's my main focus. I shifted from working in private practice and seeing patients to creating mental health trainings for people who are about to be parents, people who are new parents, as well as professionals who interact with that population. So lactation consultants, doulas, midwives, nurses, yoga teachers, any of
Yeah, that's amazing. I can't wait to hear more about that. I would like to take you way back to your upbringing and have you think about what your exposure to babies and specifically baby feeding was as a child, and if you heard any stories about your family as well in the generational history. I'd love to know that.
Yeah. So honestly, I think from the time I stopped being a baby was when I became obsessed with babies.
Oh,
Wherever there was a baby, that's where I was going to be. I was a really shy child. And so for some reason, that just felt way more comfortable to me. Somebody has a baby, the adults are all talking. I'm super happy to hold that baby. I did a ton of babysitting. I was pretty young when my nieces were born and a cousin. And that was just like where I was going to be. I probably played with dolls like way longer than most people. It was like, I don't know, it was just always my thing. And yeah, in terms of feeding, it definitely wasn't something that I remember being discussed. I know that I was breastfed only because that question comes up sometimes, even in a medical history. But other than that, it really wasn't. Probably the biggest intro to feeding was when my twin nieces were born, and I was like very early 20s. They were premature. My sister-in-law had attempted to breastfeed them both. That just wasn't going well, and they were bottle fed, formula fed for a whole number of reasons actually. And yeah, I think that was really the most of it. It just wasn't,
mhm.
it didn't seem to be around, wasn't a
Yeah,
discussion topic.
yeah. Okay. And then when you were preparing for having your own child, did you think about baby feeding then?
Oh yes. I was the person who, like, 1,000%, I was exclusively breastfeeding. There was no way it wasn't happening. I knew that it wasn't like the easiest thing in the world, and there were probably would need support and help, and it would be a learning process and all of that. But it was just not an option in my mind, not even a choice to entertain anything else. And you have all of this, that's what's best, so that's what you should do, and all of these benefits. And part of it was my own stubbornness, but I think most of it was that, okay, this is like the first mom thing I'm doing, so it had better be the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you were going to breastfeed. Go ahead and lead us into your story, wherever you want to take us.
Oh my, let's see. I had a picture perfect birth situation. It was ridiculously long, but I had a fantastic midwife and doula and wonderful hospital, no complications. And in the hospital, of course, they're trying to help you figure it out. But the message is it's just going to take time. We went home thinking, okay, here's some things we can work on because she's a little sleepy and all of those normal things. And I think the worst part was not realizing what I didn't know to be worried about. No, because you always think of, okay, if the baby's dehydrated, they're not going to have wet diapers. Mm-hmm. She had wet diapers. Were they wet enough? There wasn't that clarifying, this isn't the wet it should be situation. And so it was like, well, just keep at it. And there came this afternoon, and I was like, you know what? She's been asleep for a while, and I really should be feeding her. She was also a little smaller when she was born. And I try to wake her up, not responding. I do take the clothes off and I do these things. I call my husband in, not getting this baby to open her eyes. And something just feels panicked to me. Something isn't right. And we quickly look at each other. What should we do? This isn't right. My husband calls the pediatrician. And I said, I don't think I want to wait around for this person to answer the phone. Luckily, we live down the street from Children's Hospital in Boston. And I said, I think we need to go. I just don't feel right about this. And I remember jumping in the car, running into the emergency room, holding her. And the good thing is when you walk in holding a really tiny baby, they see you right away, despite the 100 and so people there. They took us back, and we had brought some milk. We also, at that point, realized maybe we needed to supplement, and we had some donor breast milk. And get seen. At this point, she is kind of awake, and sure enough, she's very dehydrated. And it just felt shocking. Where were all of these giant sirens going off? And how could I have been thinking I was feeding her? And I wasn't. And that morning, we had met with a lactation consultant from the hospital where I delivered. They have a lovely clinic that you can make appointments and show up. And she did the before and after feed. And she looked at me and she said, you could tell this was like a hard thing for her to say. She knew that I was so stubborn about doing this. And she said she didn't transfer anything.
What was your feeling in that moment?
I think it was shock. Like, how, what do you mean? Like, I feel her here. And I never had those moments of all of a sudden you wake up and like you're leaking everywhere, or like none of that ever happened. People would say, oh, has your milk come in? And my response was, I don't know, which that alone should have been a very big, let's figure that out. And the lactation consultant said, like, this baby needs to eat. Bottom line, I know this is what you want to do. I'm going to help you as best as I can get there. But in the meantime, we have to make a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And she had let us know about the milk bank. So my husband had went and got some donor milk, and we had been about to start that whole process when this thing all happened. Um, so she was admitted
How old was your daughter at this point?
just under 2 weeks.
Okay.
And, of course, she's a newborn. She's not getting weight. They have to look into what are all of the possibilities. But then I think it was fairly quickly they realized, okay, we just got to work on this feeding situation. There's nothing really that we see that's concerning.
They did blood work and everything, no metabolic disorders or.
That's something I should know the answer to. I'm not sure if they did actually do any blood work. I think it was they felt very confident it was a dehydration issue. Let's get some food into this baby and see how this goes and see what we need to do from there. They gave us donor milk since we were inpatient. And also, a lactation person came down, a feeding person came down. We had all of these people around us, and we ended up staying for 2 nights. And she consistently gained while we were there, which was nice. But then it's okay. Wow, that was a crazy, unexpected, I didn't even know that could happen. And I think given that it was already a hard intro with the feeding, that experience really sent me into this spiral of I'm responsible for this person and look what I did to them.
Oh, I'm so sorry you experienced that. I'm wondering if you were feeling any judgment from anybody at the hospital, or did everybody treat you with respect and concern and understanding that they assumed the best about you, that you were trying to
Yeah,
do what was
they
right?
did. They did. I think we heard a lot of this actually happens more than you think. So there was a nice sort of normalizing. I didn't want to be one of those people. But yeah, no, it was very much. And at one point, they actually, to get her weight going up even more, they wanted to put formula into the breast milk. And I said, I don't want to do that. Not because if I really thought that was essential, I absolutely would have done that. But it felt like, okay, I think she's doing it her way and it seems to be going in the right direction. Let's not get crazy about this.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't actually end up doing that, but it did feel very supported. And I even had asked while we were there, is donor milk an option to have access to while we were here, which luckily it was. And there was no oh no, she doesn't need that. You should just do the formula. I never felt that. But certainly paying out of pocket once we left for donor milk was not going to be an option for us.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the cost?
I think it was around $3 an ounce.
That's a lot. If you think about the babies tend to, on average, need about 24 to 34 ounces a day. That's no small amount of money per day.
Yeah, that didn't last long.
Yeah. Wow. So when you were there, were you able to talk to anyone about the signs of dehydration that you weren't aware of, that you were able to then look out for moving forward, or how to know if she was transferring milk, or was there anyone who walked you through that?
I think the biggest thing that was helpful was that once she was eating normally, to see what those diapers actually were looking like and to really notice, oh, yeah, that wasn't happening before. I think that was the biggest one for us. And just to know we needed to be weighing her very frequently and making sure she was even continuing to make very small weight gains. So I think those are the biggest things. They really definitely urged continuing to work really closely with lactation after we left, which we did.
In your home, or did you do that by going to the hospital?
When we were inpatient, we were working with the person on the floor, and then we were discharged. I went back to working with the person in the hospital where I delivered. So it was going into the clinic
Mm-hmm.
and meeting with her, some over the phone, but mostly there. And it's quickly transitioned to, once she started having those bottles regularly and filling up her belly, she was not so interested in practicing breastfeeding, which
Mm-hmm.
was also very discouraging. I can't not give her the food that she needs.
Right.
So we worked on coming up with a pumping schedule. I was doing that around the clock. All of the foods that are supposed to be helpful, tons of water, and just nothing made a difference. If I pumped for 20 minutes and I got a half an ounce, it was like amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a healthy person. I'm doing all these things. I'm working really hard at it. Why can't I make this work?
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point, I had a pretty hefty case of anxiety and
Yeah.
depression.
Mm-hmm.
And now looking back, I really think it was the mental health piece that was interfering with a lot of the production of milk.
Yeah. Milk production is all about your hormones, and you cannot have feel good, milk producing hormones coursing through your body at the same time that you have stress hormones. They block each other out, they interfere. So the mental health piece plays a huge role in milk production. I think too, your story kind of reminds me of this idea that we have that there are good babies and there are nobody ever says a baby is bad, but they might say a difficult
Mm-hmm.
baby. And good babies are the ones, societally speaking, that are quiet, that don't cry, that sleep a lot. And so often when somebody has a baby that is super sleepy and not waking, they think to themselves, I have a really great baby. And there's not this understanding that for newborns in particular, sleeping long stretches is a way of calorie conservation if you aren't getting enough calories to begin
Mm-hmm.
with. I don't know if you
Yeah.
felt that at all, or if you were concerned in the first 2 weeks, or if your baby was really sleepy.
I don't remember her being like abnormally sleepy,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think even from a baby product marketing standpoint, that's the message. They should be
Mhm.
sleeping. Like, how we're here to help you get your baby sleep. We've got a
Right.
bassinet that moves and we've got weighted blanket. The whole thing is like trying to, because it's playing into the suffering of parents. But yeah, it's sending that message to everyone that isn't necessarily the right message.
Mhm. In just a moment, we'll hear how this experience impacted Michelle's view of her own body and how she healed from this experience. But before we do, take a moment to listen to this ad for my sponsor. And remember that when you check out my sponsor and try them out, you support me and help me to keep the show going. You've heard me now for a few months talking about how much I've enjoyed getting home cooked meals delivered right to my front door from feastandfettle.com. And I'm here today to tell you that if you know somebody who is in the postpartum period, who you would like to provide true support to, that you should go to feastandfettle.com and order home cooked meals to be delivered right to their front door. One of the biggest barriers to breastfeeding success is a lack of support. A new parent is feeding a baby up to 15 times a day. How on earth do we expect that person to feed that baby that many times, also feed themselves, and provide meals to other members of their family? There's not enough time. You know how hard it is as a busy parent yourself to try to put meals on the table. Go to feastandfettle.com, use my code MILK, MILK, coordinate which meals they would like to have delivered, and send them a week's worth of delicious meals. And be the person who eases the burden for them. What a gift. I can't think of a better way to support somebody in the postpartum period. I hear this idea of people feeling like their bodies failed or they failed. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that, if you were feeling that at all because your milk supply didn't ever fully come in. What was your relationship like to your own body as you were going through this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it almost might have been easier if
Mm,
I could have blamed my body versus myself. And the difference, I
mm,
feel like, is something I talked about a lot with my own clients was that, so let's say you are suffering from depression. It's very easy to feel like you are depressed. Your whole self is depressed versus depression is something that you're experiencing, and having that space between not identifying as, the diagnosis can really help people a lot. And so I feel if I could have given myself that space and just said, my body is failing, even if I was angry about it or sad about it or whatever, that almost would have helped. But instead, I took it as my whole being was failing. And for no clear reason. I
mm,
had a friend who had a almost similar situation, but just quickly turned to formula and avoided some of the things we went through. But she had always had hormonal issues.
mm-hmm,
It wasn't like the biggest surprise, like there was something that you could blame it towards.
mm,
And I felt like nobody, even the lactation consultant, couldn't come up with a blame.
mm.
So it was, I guess it's me. And I think that made it so much harder. And that really just destroyed my mental health.
Yeah, thank you for making that distinction because I do encounter clients who we can identify the reason for the decline in milk supply or for it not coming in. If they had PCOS before, or if they have a thyroid disorder, or if they had a breast reduction surgery, or if they have some sort of trauma to their breasts in a car accident or something, and you're able to name, oh yeah, that could have damaged your milk glands. It is helpful for people to be able to say, this is the reason my supply didn't come in or my supply was low. But those clients who we cannot figure out why, I do think they have a much more difficult time coming to terms with the change in their original plan.
Mm. And who knows also if somebody could have pinpointed an exact reason, would I have felt amazing? No.
Right.
But it was just that, then what am I supposed to do about it? Like, I can't
Mhm.
fix this. Give me a
Mhm.
problem and I can do all the things to try to fix it. But
Mhm.
if I don't know what the problem is, and maybe there's not even an identifiable problem or a problem that could be fixed, then you're just stuck sitting with it. And I think
Mm.
that was the hardest thing. My daughter with pretty severe constipation
Mm.
from super early. And she actually, she was only a few weeks old, I think, when she was seen by GI.
Mhm.
And of course, they're asking like her feeding history, and that's bringing all that stuff up again. We had to supplement and start some formula because we're not millionaires. And of course, I spent so much time researching the absolute best formula. And this was like before there, even in the last 5 years, I feel like the options have changed dramatically. But we were having formula shipped from Europe.
Mm.
And so it was just like, oh, and then this whole feeding thing just keeps getting more complicated.
Mm.
Yeah, it just felt like one thing after another. And when your baby is little, that's like your job is feeding all
Mhm.
the time around the clock. And I just remember feeling this dread of, oh God, we're getting close to another feeding time. She was also having some reflux. I was having the constipation. And it was just like every feed was just like a dread when it was
Mm.
approaching.
Mm.
And that's really hard when that's like what you're doing 24 hours a day.
Yeah, babies eat between 8 and 15 times a day. Like, that's a lot of repetition of a trauma. You start to build a trauma response to this thing that brings so much pressure and stress and anxiety.
Yeah. And I talk to people about, PTSD and what that can look like and these symptoms. And one of the things that is a hallmark is that people will avoid things that remind them of the trauma. And in
Mhm.
this situation, if the trauma is your baby and feeding is a trauma, you can't just put them in the other room and not feed them, right? It's just not something you can walk away from. So I
Mhm.
think that's the hard piece too, is that it's just, we got to keep doing this.
So I know you got put on a pumping plan. How long did you keep that up?
Well, if you recall, I've mentioned a couple times how stubborn I am. Till her first birthday.
Wow. So you did some amount of pumping and you would pump for 20 minutes and get, you said, a half ounce or an ounce.
Yep. I did at some point, eventually, I did give up the overnight,
Okay.
but it was multiple times a day that I was
Mhm.
still going. And I would take whatever it is that I got and I would dump it into a bigger container. And I would,
Mhm.
2 days later or something, 3 days later, have at least enough for some of a bottle.
Mhm.
And so I felt, okay, it's something.
Mhm.
It wasn't what I wanted it to be, but I was, even if this is all I'm getting, there's no way I'm giving this up.
Mm.
And it really, as a therapist, I hate to use the word obsessive, but it was a little obsessive
Mhm.
and and really unhealthy. I wrote down to the milliliter like how much I pumped each time
Mm.
and tried to see if it was going up or down. And there certainly was probably times that I like missed out on things that were more important.
Mm. I was going to ask if, in looking back, if you think that was good for you to continue pumping for so long, because some people would say, "You know what? Even as hard as it was, it really helped me to maintain some sanity to be able to provide that for my child." And then I talked to other people, and I think the answer is gonna be different for every
Mm.
person, but for other people, they say, "Oh, man, I wish I would have given it up way earlier." So I don't know where
Yeah.
you fall on that spectrum.
I think I've seen it both ways. I think at one point, and I don't even remember when it was, like how close to when I stopped it was, somebody like adding up probably even with the small amounts that I was giving her. In her first year, she got over a gallon of breast milk,
Mm.
even from like these teeny
Mhm.
tiny little amounts at a time. And that feels really good.
Mhm.
I think I think it might have been better for me to not keep doing it, but
Mhm.
yet I think it would have been really hard to not do it as well. I was screwed no
Right.
matter what.
Right.
Yeah, it was just, I was gonna suffer one way or another. But at least she got a gallon of milk out of it.
I often, when I'm working with clients who are struggling with low milk supply or a baby that just really struggles to latch, and we're working on that. We're working on building up the muscle tone and the tongue strength and all of those things that it can sometimes take for a baby to be able to feed. I often they'll be trying to feed their baby from their body. They'll be pumping, and then, of course, they have to feed the baby the pumped milk and sometimes formula on top of that, and so they end up either triple feeding or quadruple feeding. And I often, if I encounter them in the middle of this, I will say, "How much time are you devoting to feeding your baby?" And Do you prefer to focus on just the snuggly time feeding from your breast and then supplement on top of that? Or would you prefer to not try breastfeeding and to just focus on your supply and pumping? Because doing all of it, I think, is a lot for you. And I think when we have this conversation, I can often see the relief in their face that somebody who is a breastfeeding advocate, who is an expert in this, is telling you your situation is very hard and you are working very hard and it's not sustainable. So let's find another way. We might have to do some goal adjusting here, but you're just as important as your baby.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did you ever get to have those conversations with anybody, whether it was a lactation consultant or a friend or another mental health professional?
Hmm. I think I definitely felt no one would judge or look down on it if I decided to not keep going as I was. My husband was incredibly supportive. Yeah, I do feel like somebody said that, and I'm not sure even who it was, but I think I was just so like, no, if I can't do the whole thing and
Mhm.
this is all I have,
Mhm.
then I'm going to do all that I have
Yeah.
because it's already so little. And I think the thought of even dropping one pump a day when it's already almost nothing
Mhm.
just kind of seemed that's going to kill it completely.
Mm.
And so I can't do that.
You said you felt like you had to give up some things in order to do this. You missed out on some things. Are you able to articulate what that was, or it just feels like you were in your own bubble and which separated you from the rest of the world?
I do remember, I remember when she was getting a little bit older and moving around more, and wires on a
Mhm.
pump are like really exciting for babies. I
Mhm.
do remember sometimes having to, no, I need to finish this. I can't
Mhm.
hold you right now because you're grabbing at stuff. I definitely remember that. And I remember traveling, flying to see my family and bringing her as well. And like pumping in the airport because like we happened to be in an airport in the time of day when I was typically pumping. And so to do that for again such a small amount, it's not the most convenient, comfortable place. Also bringing that on top of all the things we're already bringing, like
Mhm.
it was a lot extra. But
Yeah, I sometimes when I get to talk to people when they're a few years out, they'll say, "It was my new normal, and so I didn't see how different or how much more difficult my situation was compared to somebody else's." And that I think that's the other thing I'm able to do for people when I'm having these conversations is to say, "Your situation really is difficult."
I think because the beginning for us was so extreme, I
Mhm.
blamed how I was feeling on that. Of course, I'm feeling really depressed and really anxious. I had to rush my child to the emergency room,
Right.
not, oh, I'm feeling depressed and anxious because I'm suffering from depression and
Right.
anxiety.
It felt situational at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was easy to almost blow off.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's almost funny in a way, all of the people that I saw who, and then I was experiencing the exact same thing and really just had no idea. And I think I almost took that on as my responsibility as well.
Mhm.
I should recognize this stuff. It's what I do.
Mhm.
And I remember having a moment, and my daughter was definitely still an infant, but having a moment of walking over to her crib about to pick her up and thinking, wait a second, I had like all of these professionals. It wasn't my job to check in on my mental health and be on top of it. Where were all of these people?
Yeah. It gives you really great insight into how so many people can go undiagnosed or fall through the cracks because it might just be a quick questionnaire, but I've had people tell me, "I literally told the pediatrician or my OB at the 6-week follow-up, I'm dying." Like, I don't think this is normal, and they'll just say, "Yeah, being a mom is hard."
I would say almost every woman that I treated, if they voiced their own concerns to their doctor, it was dismissed.
Yeah,
And that was if they had enough guts to do it in the first place.
right?
And I remember sitting in my 6-week postpartum visit and getting handed the screening tool, sitting down to fill it out, and actually realizing, wow, this is really hard to fill out. I don't feel
Mhm,
like I fit into any of these categories for
mhm,
answers. And going back in, handing it back to receptionist, going back in with my midwife, who I absolutely adored, and her saying, "Okay, did you score this yourself after you did it?" Knowing my professional background. And I said, "Of course." And that was the end of our conversation.
mm.
And
Yeah, it's almost
honestly,
like if they know your background, then they just think you can take care of yourself.
and I don't even remember what my score was because everybody errs on the side of looking better than what they're probably doing.
Mhm,
But in thinking back on that conversation, that was just wrong. And
mhm,
I had a pediatrician who before every well check you'd get this like electronic message asking you to fill out this giant questionnaire, and there was a parent mental health questionnaire every time. And I was brutally honest eventually, and it was never ever discussed.
mm,
And all of those things, I had a doula,
mhm,
never ever asked me my mental health at all. And I actually had a very close friend have a completely out of the blue, total shock, nobody knows why, full term stillbirth.
mm,
We were pregnant at the same time.
mm,
This happened about 2 months before I was due.
mm,
Whoa, red flags, red flags. I should be really heavily watched after that. And I said this to my midwife in an appointment. My friend just experienced this. Oh my God. And there wasn't a lot of follow through. And it was really all of those people and their lack of understanding or doing anything about it or trying to figure it out pushed my career in a different direction. And I really started thinking about, okay, it's not just seeing people who are already knowing they need help. It's finding all of these people who should be catching the people who need help and figuring out why they don't know these people need help and teaching them how to bring it up, how to notice it, what to do about it, and trying to get ahead of this.
So I would love to know, how do you do this work? What are your offerings and how can people, if they're thinking, yeah, I'm a doula, I'm a lactation consultant, I'm a pediatrician, I'm an OB, I'm a midwife, but I really feel like I probably should be able to have a safety net for people. What do you offer people?
Yeah, so it really started with doulas because I
Mm,
feel like it's such a unique relationship and like how rare to have somebody who's like personally there for you before, during, and after. And they're probably maybe the most approachable. And so, yeah, I started thinking about what do they need to know? I do a full day. So it's 5.5 hours of like on time where we're talking about most common diagnoses. We're talking about racial disparities in care. We're talking about how to have a hard conversation, how to form relationships with other perinatal professionals, what kind of treatments are available, like crash course. I don't want to say all you need to know because that's unlimited, but I would say almost all that you probably need. I do these a couple times a year. They're always, I started during COVID, so we just started from a Zoom live virtual model. That's actually worked the best, honestly, because when we do these, I've got people from multiple states, I've had people from out of the country. So it's just really accessible to do it that way. One course up right now, and it's an hour, very intro for lactation consultants through my website, where it is you sign up, you get the link, you do it on your own time. I'm always available for questions and things like that. But that's the one I have that's recorded and up now. But yeah, I look for any opportunity to talk about it with non-mental health people, because there's just so many people that interact with this population that it is just at a higher risk. So your risk of suffering from depression in your life as a woman is never higher than it is during your postpartum year. Your risk of postpartum or anxiety during pregnancy is twice as high as your risk for gestational diabetes. Everybody's got to go through that horrible gestational diabetes test. How many people are screening during pregnancy, which is actually American College of Gynecology and Obstetrics actually in their suggestion says everyone should be screened at initial, at some point during pregnancy, and in postpartum. I don't know where that's happening. But if your governing body is telling you it and you're not doing it, like,
As you mentioned too, though, the screenings are often happening. We're filling out the questionnaires, but then there's no discussion or follow up to the answers. And so if you fill out a screening and then nobody talks to you about it, you think, okay, this must be normal. This level of anxiety or worry or concern just
yeah.
must be normal.
And that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time on and talk about. What are these screening tools? The thing is that, especially the Edinburgh, which everybody's seeing hopefully at their postpartum, it's free. You don't have to have special training to use it.
Right.
There's even virtual ones that score for you. You can be taking that even as a woman at home for yourself.
Yeah, in my lactation kit, and I bring it up in discussion. Let's
Yeah.
talk about these things and make sure you're
And I
okay.
think it's not a diagnostic tool.
Right.
And I think what the great thing about it is that it's a great way to start a conversation if you're not quite sure how to start a conversation. But the other thing is, if you're asking questions, you have to be ready for any answer you might get.
Right.
And I think that's the big problem. People don't want to know the answer. How do I avoid getting an answer I'm uncomfortable with? I don't ask the question. And I really think you can also look at the fact that our maternal healthcare system is just so horrible in terms of the amount of time we spend with patients, and what they're trying to fit into this tiny window of time is next to impossible. But so there's many things that we really should be fixing. But I think that's the bottom line. You have to be ready to handle any answer that's thrown your way. And I don't think most people are. And that's one of the things I talk about a lot. I'm actually working on a training that's exclusively that, how to have a hard conversation.
Yeah, I love that. And you are so right that there's no use in asking the question if you don't know what to do with a difficult answer or an answer that is anything but I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay. It's hard, but I'm making it work. So that is so invaluable. Where can people find your trainings?
So they can go to, it's my name, basically, Michelle Visser LMHC, which is just my counseling license, teachable.com.
Great.
And that has what's already pre-recorded and available, but there's also a way to sign up to get emails. I also love emails directly. I love questions directly. And yeah, like I said, sometimes it's just easier to say, okay, I'm a lactation consultant and I've got these like 4 lactation consultant friends and we're really interested in this subject. Can we pick a date with you and you can train our group? I love doing that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. And almost every state has a lactation consultant association. And so that would be a great thing to bring you in to a meeting with all the members of the association to really start to fully understand how better to help this population.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a goal of the training, is obviously for people to be able to help people that really need help, but also to walk out of it feeling confident that
Mhm.
if you find yourself in this situation, which you're going to, it's going to
Mhm.
happen, that you really feel like you know what to do.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean you know how to solve it. That just means you know what to do with it.
Mhm.
It would be like so wonderful if every person who saw a lactation consultant was screened.
Mhm.
Like I just feel like I'm the person who's going to be like out on the street just handing out these screening tools, and just to anybody who happens to walk by.
Mm.
Like, you just can't do it too many times, because especially the Edinburgh looks at the previous 7 days. Okay, what about this 25 days that came before that? Or what about the days that are going to come after that? And then no one's seeing you anymore. It's just, there's just so much time and so much that goes on, and it doesn't screen for anxiety.
Mm.
And it just, it, I think there's so many missed opportunities right now, just because people aren't aware what to look for, and then again, what to do with it.
Yeah, I love that. I have also found that unless a mental health professional is really focused on the perinatal population, I have a lot of people who come to me and they say, I went to see somebody, but when I told them I was really struggling with breastfeeding, I got dismissed, or I was told, at least you have a healthy baby. And there is this idea that if we have difficulties feeding our babies, that we should just get over it, even amongst mental health professionals. And I always like to remind my clients that even if you have to change the plan and you know your baby is healthy and that's what you needed to do, it is also okay to grieve your lost experience and to go through that process of coming to terms with how things are looking differently than you wanted them to. And I feel like people who are in the postpartum period, their feelings about these sorts of things really do get dismissed by people who don't understand the complexities of this time.
Mhm.
So it's hard to find mental health professionals who really get the postpartum period. I find if somebody is looking for somebody who specializes in perinatal mental health, what are your suggestions for how they can find somebody who is not going to dismiss their anxieties or their frustrations or their sadness around their experience at this time?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, a therapist, there's really no emotion, right, that should be dismissed, no matter what
Right.
it is. And but there is definitely a lot of nuances to this time period. So it is very unique. It is like a niche field. And I think the best possible space is, so there's an organization called Postpartum Support International. Fantastic. The amount of stuff they do is just mind boggling. But they actually have a perinatal therapist search tool on their
Mm.
website. So everybody who's in that you can search, anybody that pops up is going to have perinatal experience.
Mhm.
There is a perinatal certification that just, that they do. It's certainly not essential. There are plenty of it. I don't have it, honestly.
Mhm.
I feel like I already have, just from experience and my own trainings and things, that I it's just not another certification I have. So it
Mhm.
doesn't mean if they don't have it, they don't know.
Mm.
But that would be the first place I would go to search. You can search by location, by insurance, a whole bunch of different things.
Oh, that's great. I often do send people there for support groups
Yeah,
specifically,
their groups are
or their text line.
amazing.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
to know that you can actually, if you're like, "Okay, I need more than a support group. I need to find a professional." I did not know that they had a professional search tool. So that's really great. And it's great that you can search it by zip code and insurance, because that can really impact whether or
Mhm.
not somebody can
And I
get
would say
care.
at this point, most people still have a virtual option.
Mm,
What's great about that is one, not only do you not have to worry about getting somewhere, but also depending on where you are in your state. Certainly, if you're
right.
in Boston versus all the way Western Massachusetts, the
Mhm.
amount of people who are available are going to be very different. And
Yeah,
just with insurance, if I'm licensed in Massachusetts, for example, I can see anybody in Massachusetts.
right.
So it really has opened up possibilities. That's actually been fairly helpful. There's certainly not quite as enough of us as needed, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So that's really good to know. Okay. I thank you so much for all of your resources. And I appreciate you being willing to share your really, really difficult baby feeding story.
Thank you for making the space for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure you have done a lot of work to come to terms with your story, but I just want to name for you that I can hear how hard you tried. And I wish that women's health was studied more and that milk supply was studied more, and that we could say what went wrong and why. And I just sit with this idea with you that there are just mysteries sometimes that can't be solved. And I'm really sorry that you had to be one of the people to go through that.
Thank you.
Mhm. All right. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I feel for any person who has suffered through low milk supply with no reason. I have seen time and time again how difficult it can be for people who really wanted to breastfeed. They really wanted to make it happen. And for them, that just wasn't their story. So as you're out in the world interacting with people who have recently had babies, tread cautiously when you ask them about how they're feeding or how sleep is going or what their choices are, because sometimes it's not always a choice. And with that, if you are looking for somebody to help you with your low milk supply, I would love to be the person who helps you to either solve the mystery, to improve, or to come to terms with what your body is able to do or not do. So if you reach out to me at www.quabbinbirthservices.com, I would love to help you figure out your milk supply difficulties. And if you are trying to pump around the clock and feed a baby and care for yourself and other members of your family all at the same time, I urge you to consider trying out feastandfettle.com if you live in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Maine, or Connecticut.